I woke up at 5:30 on a Tuesday morning in February to the sound of snowplows scraping down Elmwood Drive in Boulder, Colorado, and immediately knew I had about 3 hours before my driveway would become a problem for the HOA. The storm had dumped 14 inches overnight, and my truck was buried under a white mountain that would take an hour to dig out under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and I had not been living under normal rules since Brenda Henderson took over as HOA president 6 months ago. My name is Nathan Brooks, and I had lived in the Silverleaf Commons subdivision for 8 years without major incident. The neighborhood sat on the northern edge of Boulder, where cookie-cutter homes with beige siding and identical landscaping stretched for 6 blocks in every direction. When I bought my 3-bedroom ranch in 2018, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. They enforced basic rules about lawn maintenance and holiday decorations, collected dues quarterly, and mostly stayed out of everyone's business. Then, Brenda Henderson moved in 3 houses down, and everything went to hell. The new snow removal policy had been announced at the January meeting, which I attended because my neighbor Doug texted me in all caps that I needed to be there. Brenda stood at the front of the community center conference room in a cream-colored pantsuit, her highlighted blonde hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, and explained that several residents had complained about the noise from snow blowers and shoveling early in the morning. Therefore, effective immediately, no snow removal activities would be permitted before 9 a.m. on any day, including weekdays when people needed to get to work. The room had erupted. Doug, a software engineer who started work at 7, stood up and asked how he was supposed to get his car out of his driveway. Brenda smiled her tight-lipped smile and suggested he either park in the street during snowstorms or wake up earlier to clear his driveway after 9 and arrive at work late. When someone pointed out that the city had parking bans during snow emergencies, Brenda shrugged and said that was not the HOA's problem. I raised my hand and asked about liability. If someone could not clear their driveway and slipped on their own property, or if mail carriers or delivery drivers got hurt, who was responsible? Brenda's smile vanished, and she said the HOA would not be held liable for individual homeowner negligence. The policy was about community peace and quiet, and it would be enforced with fines of $200 per violation. The vote passed 7-4 on the HOA board, with Brenda's voting bloc of retired neighbors pushing it through. I left that meeting knowing I would eventually have to deal with this insanity, but I did not expect the confrontation to come so soon. Now, standing in my kitchen with coffee brewing and snow still falling lightly outside, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and called Mike's Professional Snow Removal, a company I found online that serviced the Boulder area. A tired voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Mike's Snow Removal, this is Steve. Hi, I need a crew at my house as soon as possible this morning. Can you have someone here by 6? Sure, we have teams working all night. What's the address?" I gave him my information and added, "Actually, I need you to do my entire street. There are 42 houses on Elmwood Drive. Can you handle that?" There was a pause. "You want us to clear 42 driveways, sidewalks, and walkways from the street to the front doors. How much would that cost?" I heard typing in the background. "That's going to run about $3,500, maybe $4,000 depending on how bad it is. You want all of them done?" "Every single house. I will pay cash. Can you start at 6 a.m. sharp?" Cash works. "Yeah, we can have 3 trucks there by 6. This for real, completely real. I will meet your crew at 842 Elmwood Drive. That's my house. Start there and work your way down both sides of the street." I hung up and sat down at my kitchen table, my heart pounding. This was either the smartest or dumbest thing I had ever done, but I could not stand by and watch Brenda and her cronies make everyone's life miserable over a ridiculous power trip. The HOA rules stated that homeowners were responsible for maintaining their properties, which included snow removal for safety reasons. Brenda's new policy directly contradicted that requirement, and I was willing to bet that the contradiction would cause her significant problems. At 5:55, I bundled up in my heavy coat and boots and went outside. The snow had stopped, leaving everything covered in a pristine white blanket that would have been beautiful if it was not such a massive inconvenience. 3 large pickup trucks with plow attachments and Mike's Professional Snow Removal logos on the doors turned onto Elmwood Drive right at 6 a.m. I waved them down, and a stocky man in his 50s climbed out of the lead truck. "Nathan Brooks, that's me. Thanks for coming out so early." He shook my hand. "Steve Morrison, you're the guy paying for the whole street. That's right. Start here and work your way down. Every house gets a clear driveway and walkway." Steve looked at the rows of identical houses and shrugged. "Your money. We will have it done in about 3 hours." The sound of diesel engines and plows scraping pavement filled the quiet morning air at 6:15. I stood in my driveway, watching the crews work with efficient precision. 2 men operated snow blowers while another used a plow attachment on a small utility vehicle to clear the driveways. They moved from house to house like a well-oiled machine, and within 20 minutes, 5 properties were completely clear. Lights started coming on in windows up and down the street. Doug came out of his house at 6:30, saw his driveway already cleared, and walked over with a confused expression. "Nathan, what the hell is going on? Professional snow removal crew. I hired them for the whole street." "You hired them? Why?" "Because Brenda's rule is garbage and I am making a point." Doug stared at me, then at the crews working their way down the block. "You know she is going to fine everyone, right? The rule says no snow removal before 9. "I know. That's the point. I hired the crew, but they are clearing everyone's property. Let her try to fine all 42 houses. We will see how that goes." By 7:15, half the street was done. More neighbors had emerged, some thanking the crew members, others looking worried. Margaret Rossi, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down, came over wearing a thick purple coat and concern on her wrinkled face. "Nathan, dear, this is very generous, but Brenda is going to have a fit." "Let her have a fit. This rule is illegal. HOA covenants require us to maintain our properties. We cannot maintain them if we are not allowed to remove snow. She will say you violated the quiet hours policy." "I did not violate anything. I hired a professional crew to provide a service. They are not homeowners." "The rule says homeowners cannot remove snow before 9. It does not say anything about professional services." Margaret's eyes widened. "Oh, you clever boy." At 7:45, a silver Lexus SUV came speeding down the street, fishtailing slightly on the packed snow that the city plows had left in the road. Brenda Henderson parked haphazardly in front of my house and stormed out, her face red despite the cold temperature. She wore designer workout clothes and looked like she had just rolled out of bed. "What is the meaning of this?" she shouted, marching up to me. "Good morning, Brenda. Nice weather we are having." "Do not play games with me, Nathan. You are violating HOA policy. Snow removal is not permitted before 9 a.m. "I am not removing snow. I hired a professional crew to remove snow. The policy states that homeowners cannot remove snow before 9. I am not a snow removal company. Mike's Professional Snow Removal is a licensed business." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That is not how the rule works." "That is exactly how the rule works. You wrote a vague policy that only mentions homeowners. You said nothing about professional services. The intent was clearly to prevent any noise before 9 a.m. The intent is irrelevant. What matters is what the rule actually says. If you want to fine me, go ahead. I will see you in court, and I will bring a copy of the HOA covenants that require property maintenance. Your rule directly contradicts our responsibility to keep our properties safe and accessible. Brenda's face went from red to purple. Fine, fine. You want to play lawyer? I will fine every single house on this street for accepting services during quiet hours. You cannot fine homeowners for services they did not request. I hired the crew. I paid for it. They did not ask for this. They benefited from a violation of HOA rules. That makes them liable. She stormed back to her Lexus and sped off, leaving tire tracks in the snow. Doug walked over, shaking his head. Man, you really poked the bear. Someone had to. I am tired of her acting like she owns the neighborhood. The snow removal crews finished at 9:30, clearing all 42 houses on Elmwood Drive in just over 3 hours. I paid Steve $4,000 in cash, gave his crew an extra $500 tip, and thanked them for the excellent work. As they drove away, I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. I had made my point, but I knew Brenda would retaliate. The retaliation came faster than I expected. At 11 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. A young man in a cheap suit stood on my porch holding a clipboard. Nathan Brooks. Yes, I am serving you with an HOA violation notice. You are being fined $200 for violation of the snow removal policy. He handed me an envelope and walked away before I could respond. I opened it and read the official notice, printed on HOA letterhead. It stated that I had violated the quiet hours policy by hiring a snow removal crew before 9 a.m., and I had 14 days to pay the fine or face additional penalties, including liens on my property. Over the next hour, the same young man went to every house on Elmwood Drive. I watched from my window as he delivered notices to confused neighbors. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Doug called first. Nathan, they fined me $200 for having my driveway cleared. I did not even hire these guys. I know. She is fining everyone out of spite. Can she do that? No. She cannot fine you for services you did not request. Keep that notice. Do not pay it. We are going to fight this. Margaret called next, then Tom Whitmore from across the street, then Sandra Perry 3 houses down. By 1 p.m., I had received calls from 19 different neighbors, all with the same story. Brenda had issued fines to every single house on Elmwood Drive, claiming they had benefited from a violation of HOA policy. At 2 p.m., I sent an email to all the addresses on the neighborhood directory, which I still had from the last HOA meeting. The subject line was Emergency Meeting Request Illegal HOA Fines. I explained what had happened, included copies of the HOA covenants showing the contradiction between the snow removal policy and property maintenance requirements, and requested an emergency meeting to address the issue. Within an hour, I had 37 responses. Most were angry about the fines. Several were angry at me for causing the problem in the first place. A few were grateful that someone was standing up to Brenda. One email stood out from a lawyer named Patricia Walsh who lived on the street adjacent to mine. Nathan, I am an attorney specializing in property law. What Brenda is doing is likely illegal on multiple fronts. I would be happy to represent the homeowners pro bono if this goes to court. Please call me. I called her immediately. Patricia had a calm, professional voice that instantly made me feel better about the situation. Thanks for reaching out, Mrs. Walsh. Call me Patricia. I have been waiting for someone to challenge Brenda's nonsense. That snow removal policy is unenforceable. It violates both the HOA covenants and Colorado property law. How so? Colorado law requires homeowners to maintain safe access to their properties. That includes snow removal. An HOA cannot create rules that prevent homeowners from complying with state law. Additionally, the HOA covenants require property maintenance, which you correctly identified. Brenda's rule creates a legal contradiction. What about the fines? Can she fine people for services they did not request? Absolutely not. She can potentially fine you for hiring the crew, though even that is questionable given the legal issues with the policy. But she cannot fine other homeowners for being passive beneficiaries of a service. That would be like fining someone because their neighbor decided to paint their fence. So what do we do? First, no one pays these fines. Second, we request an emergency HOA meeting to overturn the policy and rescind the fines. Third, if they refuse, we file a lawsuit against the HOA for improper enforcement and violation of state property law. We might also have grounds for harassment. How many homeowners would need to join the lawsuit? I recommend getting as many as possible. The more people involved, the stronger the case. It also shows a pattern of improper enforcement. That evening, I organized an informal meeting at my house. 26 neighbors showed up, filling my living room, kitchen, and hallway. Doug, Margaret, Patricia Walsh, and several others I knew less well all crowded in to discuss the situation. Patricia explained the legal issues in terms everyone could understand, and by the end of the meeting, 23 homeowners had agreed to sign a joint letter demanding the policy be rescinded and the fines canceled. I drafted the letter that night, had Patricia review it, and sent it via certified mail to Brenda Henderson and all 7 HOA board members on Wednesday morning. The letter outlined the legal problems with the snow removal policy, cited specific Colorado statutes and HOA covenant sections, and demanded an emergency board meeting within 7 days. Brenda's response came Friday afternoon via email to the entire neighborhood. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak. Dear Silverleaf Commons residents, the board has received correspondence regarding recent enforcement actions related to the snow removal policy. After careful consideration, the board has determined that all enforcement actions were proper and in accordance with HOA rules. The snow removal policy was properly adopted by board vote and serves the important purpose of maintaining peace and quiet during early morning hours. Residents who object to the fines may request a hearing before the board. Sincerely, Brenda Henderson, HOA President. The email triggered a firestorm. Residents started replying all, creating a chaotic email thread that spanned hundreds of messages. Some supported Brenda, mostly her retired friends who had voted for the policy. Most were angry, demanding answers about why they were being fined for something they did not do. A few tried to play peacemaker, suggesting compromise solutions like allowing snow removal after 7 a.m. instead of 9. I stayed out of the email chaos and focused on building the legal case. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Regulatory Office, outlining the illegal nature of the policy. She also prepared a lawsuit on behalf of 23 plaintiffs, ready to file in Boulder County District Court if the HOA did not back down. The following Tuesday, the HOA scheduled a special board meeting to address the controversy. It was held at 7 p.m. in the community center, and the parking lot was packed by 6:45. I arrived early and found a seat in the front row. Patricia sat next to me with a leather briefcase full of documents. Doug, Margaret, and most of the fined homeowners filled the rest of the seats. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, her expression neutral and professional. The other board members looked uncomfortable, especially Janet Morse and Richard Kelly, who I knew were reasonable people despite voting for the policy. This meeting has been called to address concerns about enforcement of the snow removal policy, Brenda began. The board will hear comments from residents, but we will maintain order. Each speaker has 3 minutes. I stood up first. Nathan Brooks, 842 Elmwood Drive. The snow removal policy violates Colorado property law and HOA covenants. Colorado revised statutes require homeowners to maintain safe access to properties. The HOA covenants require property maintenance. Your policy prevents both. Additionally, you cannot fine homeowners for services they did not request. I hired the snow removal crew. My neighbors did not. Fining them is improper and potentially illegal. Brenda's jaw tightened. The policy was properly adopted. Homeowners are responsible for what happens on their property. That is not how liability works. If someone throws a newspaper on my lawn without my permission, I am not liable for them trespassing. If I hire a crew to clear snow on my neighbor's property without their knowledge, they cannot be held responsible for my actions. Patricia stood up next. Patricia Walsh, attorney at law, representing 23 homeowners on Elmwood Drive. Ms. Henderson, I have reviewed the policy and enforcement actions. The HOA is exposed to significant legal liability. I strongly recommend rescinding the fines and revising the policy to comply with state law. The board does not take legal advice from random residents, Brenda snapped. I am not a random resident. I am a property attorney with 15 years of experience, and I am informing you that if these fines are not rescinded, my clients will file suit in district court. We will also seek damages for harassment and improper enforcement. The room erupted in applause and shouts. Brenda banged a gavel on the table, calling for order. Richard Kelly leaned toward Brenda and whispered something. She shook her head violently. Other residents spoke, mostly in support of rescinding the fines. A few of Brenda's allies defended the policy, arguing that rules were rules and needed to be enforced. One man, Frank Davidson, suggested that the real problem was my stunt, and that I should pay everyone's fines since I caused the problem. That sparked another round of arguments. Doug stood up and told Frank that I had done everyone a favor by clearing their driveways, and that maybe Frank should be grateful instead of being Brenda's lapdog. Frank called Doug an anarchist who did not respect community rules. Margaret stood up and told both of them to sit down and act like adults. The meeting descended into chaos for 10 minutes before Brenda regained control. Finally, she called for a vote on whether to rescind the fines. The vote was 4-3 to maintain the fines. Brenda, Frank Davidson's wife Louise, who was on the board, and 2 other retired residents voted to keep the fines in place. Richard, Janet, and 1 other member voted to rescind. The fines stand, Brenda announced. If residents wish to appeal, they may request individual hearings. This meeting is adjourned. Patricia turned to me as people filed out angrily. Well, we tried. Now we file suit. The lawsuit was filed the next morning in Boulder County District Court. 23 plaintiffs were listed, all residents of Elmwood Drive who had been fined. The complaint sought to overturn the fines, invalidate the snow removal policy, and recover legal fees and damages for harassment. Patricia also filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any collection actions or placing liens on properties while the case was pending. The local news picked up the story that afternoon. A reporter from a Boulder TV station showed up at my door at 5 p.m. asking for an interview. I agreed, figuring public pressure might help our case. So you hired a snow removal crew for your entire street? The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, asked. I did. The HOA passed a rule saying homeowners could not remove snow before 9 a.m., even though we all need to get to work. I hired professionals to clear everyone's driveways so people could safely leave their homes. The HOA responded by fining everyone $200. Even people who did not hire the crew. Even people who did not hire the crew. They are being punished for something I did, which makes no sense legally or ethically. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news with the headline, HOA fines entire street over snow removal. The segment included interviews with several neighbors, most of whom were angry about the fines. Brenda declined to be interviewed but sent a written statement defending the policy as necessary to maintain community standards. The story went viral locally, then picked up regional and eventually national attention. By Thursday, I was getting calls from news outlets across the country wanting to talk about the tyrannical HOA in Boulder. I did a phone interview with a national morning show, explained the situation, and emphasized that this was about unreasonable HOA rules that contradicted state law. The publicity brought unexpected consequences. On Friday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA informing me that my fine had been increased to $1,000 for bringing negative attention to the community. Patricia immediately added that to the lawsuit as further evidence of harassment. The court hearing for the temporary restraining order was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Patricia was confident, but cautioned me that judges were sometimes reluctant to interfere with HOA governance. We needed to make a clear case that the HOA was violating state law and acting beyond its authority. The hearing was held at 9 a.m. in a small courtroom. Judge Michael Rodriguez, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, presided. Patricia presented our case, walking through the Colorado statutes requiring property maintenance, the HOA covenants requiring the same, and the contradiction created by the snow removal policy. She argued that the HOA was enforcing an illegal rule and punishing homeowners for complying with state law. The HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gerald Pierce, argued that HOAs had broad authority to create rules for community welfare, and that the snow removal policy was a reasonable exercise of that authority. He claimed that homeowners could comply with both the policy and state law by clearing snow after 9 a.m. and accepting that they might be late for work. Judge Rodriguez listened carefully, asked several pointed questions, and took a brief recess to review the documents. When he returned, he looked annoyed. "I am granting the temporary restraining order," he said. "The HOA may not take any collection actions, place liens, or impose additional fines related to this matter pending trial. Furthermore, I am troubled by the legal theory the HOA is advancing. Colorado law is clear that homeowners must maintain safe access to their properties. A rule that prevents them from doing so during the only practical time available is likely unenforceable. The HOA should seriously consider settling this matter." We walked out of the courthouse with a significant victory. The restraining order meant the HOA could not enforce the fines while the case proceeded, and the judge's comments suggested he thought our legal argument was strong. Brenda did not take the loss well. At the next regular HOA meeting 2 weeks later, she announced that the board was implementing new policies to prevent abuse of HOA processes. These included requirements that any homeowner requesting a meeting or filing a complaint must pay a $50 processing fee, limitations on how often residents could address the board, and a rule that any homeowner involved in litigation against the HOA would be barred from using community facilities like the pool and clubhouse. These new policies triggered a second wave of anger. Patricia amended our lawsuit to challenge the retaliatory rules, arguing they violated Colorado's HOA statutes that protected homeowner rights to participate in governance. She also filed a complaint with the state regulatory office for HOA violations. The situation escalated further when several homeowners discovered that Brenda had been using HOA funds inappropriately. Tom Whitmore, who worked as an accountant, requested copies of the HOA financial records, as was his right under Colorado law. When the records arrived, he found thousands of dollars in questionable expenses: luxury hotel stays for HOA conferences, expensive dinners charged as board meetings, and payments to a landscaping company owned by Brenda's brother-in-law that seemed vastly inflated. Tom brought the records to Patricia and me. We spent an evening going through them, and the pattern was clear. Brenda had been treating the HOA like a personal piggy bank for at least a year, possibly longer. "This is embezzlement," Patricia said quietly. "She has been stealing from the HOA." "What do we do?" I asked. "We have to report it. This is not a civil matter anymore. This is criminal." I felt a knot in my stomach. I had wanted to stop Brenda's petty tyranny, not send her to prison, but Patricia was right. This was not about HOA rules anymore. This was about theft. Tom filed a police report the next day. The Boulder Police Department sent a detective, Sarah Martinez, to interview him and review the financial records. Detective Martinez was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about HOA finances and how the records were obtained. She also interviewed several other board members who seemed shocked by the allegations. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, the lawsuit moved forward. The HOA's attorney, Gerald Pierce, approached Patricia about a settlement. The board, minus Brenda, was willing to rescind all fines, invalidate the snow removal policy, and pay our legal fees if we dropped the suit. Patricia negotiated hard and got them to also agree to remove Brenda as HOA president and implement financial oversight procedures. We accepted the settlement. All fines were rescinded, the snow removal policy was eliminated, and Brenda was forced to resign from the board. The settlement was finalized in early April, just as the last of the winter snow was melting, but the criminal investigation continued. In late April, Detective Martinez contacted Tom, Patricia, and me to let us know they had completed their investigation. They had found evidence of embezzlement totaling approximately $38,000 over 18 months. Brenda had been systematically billing personal expenses to the HOA and approving payments to her brother-in-law's company for work that was never performed or was billed at inflated rates. On April 28th, Brenda Henderson was arrested at her home and charged with felony theft and embezzlement. The arrest made the local news again, with reporters rehashing the snow removal controversy and framing it as the incident that led to the discovery of her crimes. I felt strange watching the news footage of Brenda being led to a police car in handcuffs. I had not set out to destroy her life. I just wanted to clear my driveway. The criminal case moved through the system over the summer. Brenda pleaded not guilty initially, but eventually accepted a plea deal in August. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony theft and agreed to repay the full $38,000 plus interest and legal fees. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with 1 year suspended, meaning she would serve 1 year followed by probation. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected new board members, including Richard Kelly as president and Tom Whitmore as treasurer. They implemented transparent financial reporting and eliminated several of Brenda's more ridiculous rules. The community center held a summer barbecue in July that felt genuinely friendly for the first time in months. I was grilling burgers at that barbecue when Margaret came over with a plate of potato salad. "You know, Nathan, when you hired those snow removal trucks, I thought you were crazy," I laughed. "I was a little crazy. I did not expect all of this. You stood up for what was right. The rest of us were too scared or too tired. You gave us the courage to fight back." "I just wanted to clear my driveway," I said. "You did more than that. You cleared out the rot that was taking over this neighborhood." Doug wandered over with a beer. To Nathan, the only man crazy enough to start a revolution over snow removal. We toasted, and I felt a warm sense of satisfaction. The whole experience had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But it had also brought the neighborhood together and removed a genuinely harmful person from power. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone. The following winter, we had another major snowstorm in early December. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of snow blowers and shovels scraping driveways up and down Elmwood Drive. People were clearing their properties whenever they needed to, without fear of fines or retaliation. I bundled up, grabbed my shovel, and went outside to clear my own driveway. Doug was already working on his driveway next door. He waved when he saw me. "No professional crew this time," he called over. "Nope, that was a one-time thing, probably for the best. That was an expensive way to make a point. Worth every penny, though." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the morning air crisp and cold. Other neighbors emerged to tackle their own driveways. Margaret used a small electric snow blower. Tom was out with a shovel, clearing his walkway methodically. Sandra from down the street had hired a teenager with a plow attachment on an ATV. It was just a normal neighborhood morning, people doing what they needed to do to maintain their homes and get on with their lives. No drama, no fines, no threats. Just a community functioning the way it was supposed to. I finished my driveway around 7:30 and went inside to warm up with coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Walsh. "Saw your snow removal story pop up in my news feed again. Someone must have shared it. You are famous." I smiled and texted back, 15 minutes of fame, I will take it. "You did good, Nathan, seriously. That whole situation could have gone very differently if you had not pushed back. Thanks, could not have done it without you. That is what neighbors are for." I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered street in shades of pink and gold. The whole experience had taught me something important about standing up for yourself and your community. Bullies, whether they are schoolyard thugs or HOA presidents, rely on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. They count on you accepting unreasonable demands because challenging them seems too difficult. But sometimes you have to fight back. Sometimes you have to hire a snow removal crew at 6 a.m. and force the issue. Sometimes you have to be willing to go to court, endure public scrutiny, and see the fight through to the end. Not because you want drama or attention, but because some things are worth fighting for. The freedom to maintain your own property. The right to participate in your community without retaliation. The principle that rules should make sense and serve everyone, not just the people in power. These things matter and they are worth defending. Brenda Henderson was released from prison after serving 10 months of her sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Her house on Elmwood Drive sold in March, and a young couple with 2 kids moved in. They seemed nice, and they definitely cleared their driveway whenever they needed to without asking permission from anyone. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Richard Kelly's leadership. They focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling legitimate disputes. The monthly meetings were boring in the best possible way, dealing with mundane issues like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. No one missed the drama. I ran into Gerald Pierce, the HOA's attorney, at a coffee shop in downtown Boulder one Saturday morning in March. He was waiting for his order when he recognized me. "Nathan Brooks, right? From the Silverleaf Commons case." "That's me. Gerald Pierce." "Yes." "I wanted to say, off the record, that you were right about that snow removal policy. I told the board it was unenforceable, but Brenda insisted on defending it." "Why did you take the case if you thought it was wrong?" he shrugged. "I am retained by the HOA, not individual board members. My job is to represent the organization and provide legal advice. They do not always take that advice." "Fair enough. For what it is worth, I think you did the community a favor. That financial audit would not have happened if you had not pushed back on the fines." "I just wanted to clear my driveway," I said, repeating what had become my standard line. He laughed. "Well, you certainly did more than that. Have a good day, Nathan." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life in Silverleaf Commons continued peacefully. The neighborhood had been through a trial by fire and emerged stronger. People were more engaged in HOA governance, attending meetings and asking questions about how their dues were spent. The board was more transparent and responsive. It was not perfect, but it was functional and fair. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondering if she understood what had gone wrong. She had started with legitimate authority as HOA president, but let that authority turn into something toxic. She had confused having power with being right, and she had used that power to bully and control instead of to serve. In the end, her own corruption had brought her down, but the snow removal incident had been the catalyst that exposed everything. On a warm Saturday in October, the HOA held a fall festival in the community center parking lot. There were food trucks, a bouncer for kids, and tables set up where neighbors could chat and enjoy the weather. I was manning the grill for the HOA-sponsored burger stand when Richard Kelly came over. "Nathan, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did last winter." "You already thanked me, Richard, multiple times." "I know, but I mean it. This neighborhood was heading in a bad direction. Brenda had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, and the rest of us just went along with it. You had the guts to say no. I was just tired of being pushed around. That is when change happens. When ordinary people get tired of being pushed around and decide to push back. You reminded us all that we have power too, not just the people running the meetings." I flipped a burger and thought about that. I guess I did, but I could not have done it alone. Patricia provided the legal expertise. Tom found the financial irregularities. Doug and Margaret and everyone else stood with me. It was a team effort. "Sure, but you were the one who hired that snow removal crew. You were the one who forced the issue. Leadership is not about having a title. It is about taking action when no one else will." "Are you trying to get me to run for the HOA board?" I asked, suspicious. Richard laughed. "Actually, yes. We have an opening and you would be great." "Absolutely not. I have had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. Think about it. The best leaders are the ones who do not want power." I shook my head but smiled. "I will think about it, but no promises." As the festival continued around us, I reflected on the strange journey that had started with a simple decision to hire a snow removal crew. That choice had spiraled into a legal battle, exposed financial crimes, and ultimately changed the trajectory of an entire neighborhood. It had cost me $4,000, countless hours, and significant stress. But it had also shown me what was possible when people stood together for what was right. The lesson was not that you should always fight every petty rule or challenge every authority figure. That way lay exhaustion and madness. The lesson was that some fights are worth having, some lines are worth drawing, and some principles are worth defending. The trick was knowing which battles to choose. The snow removal policy had been such a battle. It was not just about clearing driveways. It was about whether the HOA served the residents or the residents served the HOA. It was about whether rules made sense or were just exercises in power. It was about whether we would accept unreasonable demands because challenging them was difficult. We had chosen to fight, and we had won. Not just in court, but in restoring a sense of community and shared purpose. The neighborhood was not perfect, but it was ours again, not Brenda Henderson's personal kingdom. As the sun set on that October evening, casting long shadows across the festival, I felt genuinely content. I had not set out to be a hero or a community organizer. I had just wanted to clear my driveway and get to work on time. But sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes hiring a snow removal crew at 6 a.m. is exactly what a neighborhood needs. Doug came over with his wife Lisa and their 2 kids. "Nathan, we are grabbing food. You want anything?" "I am good. I have been eating burgers all afternoon." "Fair enough." "Hey, did you hear they are predicting snow next week?" I groaned. "Already, it is only October." "Welcome to Colorado. At least this time we can actually clear our driveways without getting fined." "Silver linings," I agreed. As they walked away, I looked around at the festival, at the neighbors laughing and talking, at the kids playing, at the community that had survived and thrived despite everything. This was what it was all about. Not the drama or the lawsuits or the news coverage. Just ordinary people living their lives in peace, able to maintain their homes and participate in their community without fear. That was worth fighting for. That would always be worth fighting for. The following week brought the predicted snow, just 4 inches but enough to require clearing. I woke up at my normal time, had coffee, and went out to shovel my driveway at 6:30 in the morning. No professional crew this time, just me and a shovel, and the quiet satisfaction of maintaining my own property on my own schedule. Doug was already out working on his driveway. We waved to each other and got to work. Up and down the street, other neighbors emerged to clear their own properties. Some used snow blowers, some had shovels. One guy used a leaf blower which seemed inefficient but entertaining to watch. It was a perfectly ordinary morning, unremarkable in every way. And that was exactly how it should be. 6 months later, in April, I received an email from a homeowner in a subdivision in Minnesota. She had read about our situation online and was dealing with a similar tyrannical HOA president. She wanted advice on how to fight back against unreasonable rules. I spent an hour crafting a detailed response, explaining the legal strategies Patricia had used, the importance of documenting everything, the value of getting neighbors organized, and the necessity of being willing to see the fight through to the end. I emphasized that every situation was different, and she should consult with a local attorney familiar with Minnesota HOA law. She wrote back thanking me profusely and saying my story had given her hope. That felt good. Maybe something positive could come from all the stress and drama. Maybe other people in other neighborhoods could learn from what had happened in Silverleaf Commons. Over the following months, I heard from several other homeowners dealing with HOA problems. Some were fighting unreasonable fines. Others were dealing with board members who abused their authority. A few were uncovering financial mismanagement. I tried to help where I could, offering advice and encouragement. It was strange becoming an accidental activist for HOA reform. I had never planned to be the public face of anything, but sometimes circumstances choose you rather than you choosing them. The snow removal incident had put me in a position where I could help others, and I felt an obligation to do so. In June, I was contacted by a writer working on a book about HOA abuses in America. She wanted to include our story as a case study in how communities could successfully fight back against unreasonable rules. I agreed to be interviewed, figuring the more people knew about these issues, the better. The interview took place over Zoom and lasted nearly 2 hours. The writer, Karen Mitchell, was thorough and insightful, asking questions about not just what happened but why it happened, and what it meant for the broader issue of HOA governance. "What do you think allowed Brenda Henderson to become so tyrannical?" she asked at one point. "Apathy, mostly," I said. "Most people do not pay attention to HOA governance until it affects them directly. They do not go to meetings, they do not read the communications, they just pay their dues and hope for the best. That creates a vacuum that power-hungry people like Brenda can exploit. So how do we prevent that? Engagement. People need to actually participate in their HOA, attend meetings, ask questions, vote in elections. And they need to be willing to push back when rules do not make sense. If we had all challenged the snow removal policy immediately instead of just complaining about it privately, maybe it never would have been enforced. But you did challenge it in a pretty dramatic way. I did, and I do not regret it. But it would have been easier if more people had spoken up from the beginning. The book came out the following year, and our story was featured prominently in a chapter about HOA overreach and financial corruption. The writer did an excellent job capturing both the absurdity of the snow removal policy and the serious issues of embezzlement that emerged. I heard from several more homeowners after the book was published, all dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Meanwhile, life in Silverleaf Commons continued peacefully. I remained actively involved in the HOA, attending meetings and serving on a committee to review and update the covenants. Richard Kelly proved to be an excellent president, focused on transparency and community service rather than power and control. The neighborhood had learned its lesson. Power needed to be checked, rules needed to make sense, and financial oversight was essential. We implemented new procedures requiring quarterly financial reports, board term limits, and easier processes for residents to call special meetings and challenge decisions. These reforms made the HOA stronger and more resilient. There would always be disagreements about community policies. That was inevitable when you had people with different priorities and values living together. But the disagreements were now handled through proper channels with appropriate oversight, not through arbitrary decrees from a petty tyrant. 2 years after the snow removal incident, I was loading groceries into my truck in the parking lot of a Boulder supermarket when I saw a familiar figure walking toward the store entrance. Brenda Henderson looked older and worn down, her formerly perfect hair now showing gray roots, her expensive clothes replaced with ordinary jeans and a sweater. Our eyes met briefly. She recognized me. I could see it in her face. For a moment I thought she might say something, but she just looked away quickly and hurried into the store. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction that she had faced consequences for her actions, pity for how far she had fallen, and lingering anger at the stress she had caused so many people. I finished loading my groceries and drove home, reflecting on the encounter. Brenda had made choices that destroyed her life. She had chosen to abuse her authority, to steal from her neighbors, to retaliate against anyone who challenged her. Those choices had consequences, and she was living with them now. But I had made choices too. I had chosen to fight back, to hire that snow removal crew, to pursue legal action, to see the situation through to its conclusion. Those choices had consequences as well, mostly positive. I had helped my community, exposed corruption, and learned valuable lessons about standing up for what was right. In the end, that was what mattered. Not revenge or punishment or seeing Brenda brought low, but the positive changes that came from challenging an unjust system. The neighborhood was better off. Other communities had learned from our example, and I had discovered that I was capable of more than I thought. As I pulled into my driveway on Elmwood Drive, I saw Doug washing his car in his driveway and Tom mowing his lawn across the street. Margaret was tending to her garden, and the new family down the street had their kids playing basketball in the driveway. It was a perfect summer afternoon in a peaceful neighborhood where people were free to maintain their properties, participate in their community, and live their lives without fear of arbitrary rules or petty tyrants. That was worth fighting for. That would always be worth fighting for. And if I ever had to do it again, I would hire another snow removal crew at 6 a.m. without hesitation. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance change everything. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. And sometimes all it takes to start a revolution is being willing to clear your driveway when you need to, regardless of what the HOA president says. I got out of my truck, waved to my neighbors, and went inside my house. It was just another day in Silverleaf Commons, and that was exactly how it should be. The end.